Joining us this afternoon for part of our educational webinar series. Today, we are going to be reviewing 5 ways hiring managers can improve in 2018. And we're just going to let a couple more people join. So if you bear with us 1 minute, we'll jump into a few things. While we wait, I'll go over the agenda for today. So as always, you're in listen-only mode, meaning you can hear us, but we cannot hear you. So what you want to do is use your control panel to ask questions, raise your hand. If you have any comments you want to put into the chat, use that control panel. Well, there's a couple of us behind the scenes that will be paying attention. So questions that come in, we'll make sure that we ask our experts today. And any questions that we may or may not get to, don't worry. We'll make sure that we'll follow up and make sure to get everything answered. So please don't worry about that. Please make sure to ask questions. Like I said, we don't bite. So join in, have fun with us. Special thanks to our sponsors. Without them, today's webinar wouldn't be possible. Thanks, quick shout out to my ally and Allegis Global. You can see a little bit about each company right here with their contact information. And again, thanks to these 2 companies. You're going to hear a little bit from each of them a little bit later, so I won't ruin all of the goods just yet. And I think that's about it. I'm going to kick it off. We've got some awesome experts that are going to be presenting with us today. We're going to welcome Craig Fisher from Allegis Global Solutions. There is his awesome contact info. I love his Twitter handle, @FishDogs. It's one of my favorites. It's actually one of the ones I actually remember when I'm tweeting. And we do have our partner from RecruitingDaily, Ryan Leary, will be presenting with him. So these will be the 2 guys that we're going to be shouting your questions out to today. So if there's anything you can think of, send them all over. And without further ado, I'm actually going to
looks like we lost you there, Lex, but I'll jump in from here.
Are you there,
welcome, everybody. Craig, of course. Thank you so much for jumping on with this here. Yep, we're here. Yep. So, Craig, thanks for jumping on. Good to do another webinar with you. We've done a lot of these throughout the years, and here we are again. So it'll be some fun times. You've got a great topic. Before we do, Craig. For those of the people on the call that may not know you, not many, share a little bit about your background, what you're doing, and what you guys have going on over at Allegis.
Hey, thanks, Ryan, and hi, everyone on the line. Glad to be here.
Greg, are you there?
Thank you for having me and allowing Allegis to be a proud sponsor here with Recruiting Daily. Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Ryan? Ryan,
yeah,
can you hear me?
We got you breaking up a little bit, but we've got you.
Hello?
Yeah, we've got you.
Okay, you can hear me.
We got you, Craig.
All right, well, okay.
Yes, yep.
Just want to say thanks, everyone, for having me here today. And I'm the head of marketing at Allegis Global Solutions, and we are an RPO and MSP provider in the talent acquisition space, and we help employers hire better and manage their vendors if they're doing contract hiring. And we do outsource recruiting. I am also the head of employer branding for Allegis, so I help all of our customers do that piece better. So this topic today is very fun for me. I also run the TalentNet conferences and consulting business, where I individually help teams of recruiting and salespeople brand themselves better and help attract more of the right prospects. So I've been doing this for way too long, and Ryan and I, you and I do go way back, and I'm glad to be doing this with you again.
Yeah, definitely. And before we kick off, Craig, I want to bring in Deepti, who is the founder over at My Ally. So normally, guys, we don't jump in and go through vendors, but I wanted to introduce Deepti because they've got some really good things happening here that I want to introduce to people. We all know automation, recruiting automation, coordination, things like that. And that's where my ally has been extremely strong over the last probably 24 months. And I think you guys are going to start to hear a lot about them. They've got some good things. So Deepti, are you on the line?
Yes, Ryan. Thank you so much for the introduction, and super happy to be a sponsor.
Yeah, definitely. So real brief, if you just for people that don't know My Ally, what you guys are doing, and what you guys are changing in the marketplace, give us an overview here. What's going on over there?
Definitely. I lead all you coordination in artificial intelligence. We integrate with your HR systems as well as calendaring systems, applicant tracking systems, video conferencing tools, and the like to seamlessly communicate with candidates, hiring managers, and recruiters to coordinate all interview scheduling end-to-end. We in turn reduce time to hire, cost per hire, and help hiring managers stay more focused and disciplined in a natural, seamless way and stay competitive and bring the best talent to your teams.
Right. So from your perspective, when we talk about automation technology, how is transforming in the recruiting space? What's your take there? And that's going to kick us off into the hiring conversation here with Craig as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We believe heavily in augmented intelligence, and that's where the future is. Basically, providing humans such as myself, yourself, HR professionals, hiring managers get infinite capacity and intelligence to bring the best possible outcomes. Because all of us, I think, are constrained for resources, time, and that's what leads to, inefficiencies in the recruiting process. And we believe in augmenting our own superpowers in order to bring the best competitive talent possible.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I think that's a good kickoff here, Craig, for you, on the hiring process and how to transform hiring managers in the upcoming year or two. So I'm going to kick it off. I'm going to push it off to you, Craig, and let you go from here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ryan. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, we've got
Ryan,
you.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Just want to make sure.
I think we're on a slight delay, but you are coming across very clear.
Okay. All right. Very good. So the thing that I like to think about first before ever conceiving of a job title and job description or asking a manager to talk to a candidate is what happens way before the interview ever happens. When, let's say, you give a job candidate the name of a manager who they're going to speak with, what happens at that point? Most of the time, if the job candidate is a fairly savvy person, they are probably going to go online and try to check that manager out, see what they look like, see if they can figure out what makes that manager tick. And so it's important for a hiring manager to understand how to better brand himself and what his team does to make him attractive to, his potential audience, which is job seekers, right? So managers have a couple of issues most of the time. So one of the issues is they've got a budget, right? So they're trying to definitely hire the right people, but at the same time, they're trying to do it within a certain price range, or at least feel like they're getting value. One of the things that managers really feel like they're good at is negotiating, and that's where they feel that some of their own value lies. They'd be better served to try to be a little more human and social in the first place on places like LinkedIn, even Twitter, and put themselves out there a bit so that candidates get to know them better before the interview ever has to happen. So if a candidate goes to check you out on places like LinkedIn and you don't have very much information out there at all, or you have basically just bullet points about your job, you're not necessarily going to be the most interesting or wide open person that a candidate can, try to research. So my suggestion is you put some things out there about yourself as a hiring manager and as a person to help the candidate understand who you are, what you're interested in, even some personal things, slightly personal, so that they get to know you as a human before they even have to make that call. The other thing is it'll help you attract candidates who maybe aren't flocking to your organization in the first place, right? So the more interesting you are online, the more you talk about what it's like to work on your team, why it's important to work on your team, the kind of work you're doing, and why anyone would want to work on your team. So paragraphs in your summary or in your experience on places like LinkedIn that say, I'm fortunate to get to work with the most interesting and entertaining group of professionals in XYZ industry and skill set that I could possibly imagine. And I'm so proud of the work we're doing here, and explain some of that. That sort of verbiage online allows people to feel like you are enthusiastic about your team, that you're not necessarily just a whip cracker, and that you value what your team does, and you enjoy the work that you're doing. And then encourage your team to do the same sort of things. Write some good stuff that they can all use on their LinkedIn profiles, and then post some interesting photos of what you and your team do, cultural activities, after hours activities, that sort of thing, on Twitter and Instagram and even LinkedIn on a fairly regular basis, so that it's real easy to get to know you and figure out who you are. Don't leave this up to your marketing team, because they're a small group most of the time, especially the employer marketing team. Take some initiative and do a little bit of this for yourself. And if you're a recruiter listening in to try to help coach your hiring manager, encourage them to do this sort of thing. Write them a playbook, right, of what's good to put out there on social media. What are some good things to write on your LinkedIn profile so that you seem more open and human to potential candidates? Because we get in the habit of, as hiring managers, feeling like if people are coming to interview with us, they absolutely want to work for us. And we've really given them no reason for that. Just because we're a great kind of ABC company in the world doesn't necessarily mean we're the best, or that anyone even knows who we are or what we do, to the extent that they would want to work on our team, right? They may know the corporate brand a little bit, but we need to give them more information. So Ryan, you've seen this a lot. Hiring managers kind of get heads down and siloed in what they're doing, and they forget to kind of, put themselves out there. And some of them are reluctant to, because they just don't want to field those calls or take those direct contacts. But I think that's a mistake.
I agree with you there, Craig. And actually, we had a couple questions come in, and it's almost exactly to this point. So let me just read them off, and then we can discuss those. Do you feel it's important for the hiring manager to brand their team as an individual entity, in quotes, or should they follow the company line?
Yeah, so both. And I'll tell you why. Because an employee who is actively posting things that aren't just about the company, right, is building trust and thought leadership in their own networks. So this is the what's in it for me when you ask employees to post things online. You don't want to make them just post all company stuff, because they're going to look like a robot, and it's not going to be very interesting. Nobody wants to read all your company stuff all the time. Post some interesting third-party content from good publications and blogs about careers and about job searching and about how to get work done better that is helpful to your audience. And then post some personal things and some funny things out there as well, so that people can get to know your personality. I recommend everyone has 3 things that are slightly personal about yourself that you can always feel comfortable sharing. And then that on a weekly or a couple times a week basis, you should be posting something to humanize yourself a little bit, something slightly personal about yourself. And that way, your personality shows through, and you're not just another corporate robot.
Yeah, no, one of the things that I wanted to bring up here is, and I don't think you still do this, but a long time ago you were running the LinkedIn profile trainings and assessments and
Yeah.
things like that. So back then, the fear was, I'm going to put something out, I'm going to get in trouble, and I'm going to lose my job. We've seen that happen. It hit the news a couple of times. Where are we today with that? Has that changed? And how do you, I mean, you're a massive brand, you personally, but Allegis is a massive brand. How do you guys handle that internally?
Yeah, so we're as guilty of being sort of a conservative organization as a lot of other companies are, and it takes, you know, some strong personalities pushing in the right direction to become more open. And the thing is, if your employees are enabled to post, you give them some training on the types of things that are appropriate to post, but also encourage them to be human. Just suggest some very loose guidelines. For instance, if you ask me, this is my personal opinion, but don't be overly political or religious when posting things online, right? Because half the people out there aren't going to agree with you. So why would you want to alienate half your potential audience?
Right.
Simple guidelines like that empower employees to, you know, kind of do their thing and be themselves. And we want individuals, right? We're in a culture of inclusion these days. And so that means a little more you be you and a little less you just have to be the company robot. So I think we're as a society very more open to that, and empowering employees makes them look like engaged employees online when other recruiters go looking to poach them.
I agree with that again, and we get some comments in that say they appreciate the words for bringing human back into the message. I think that's a key in any debate that we have in this industry for sure. So let's jump to the next point. Understanding your role in the hiring process. I want to look at this from two key areas. Number one, you're a hiring manager, so I want to understand. I want you to maybe help us all understand what your role is in your hiring process and how you approach it, and then what you recommend to companies at varying sizes. We have a lot of different people on the call here. So we have large companies, we have small companies. Does that differ? And where should the recruiter or the hiring manager place themselves in that process?
Right. So so I am a hiring manager, B, I also work with the hiring managers of a lot of the different groups in our organization. So Allegis Global Solutions is one part of the larger Allegis group, which has 8 operating companies that include massive organizations like Tech Systems and Aerotech. And I try to lead by example and put stuff out in the world that talks about how hiring managers can do things better. And so I consequently end up getting calls from other operating companies and other parts of the organization to say, hey, could you do a webinar or do some sort of focus group for our hiring managers to help them out? I'm also constantly talking to recruiters about being good partners and counselors. Hiring managers generally are not great at 2 things, and those are hiring and managing, right? No offense to any of you hiring managers out there, right? But you many times in different parts of the organization are not lifelong recruiters. So, you know, no one trains us how to hire, and we're only managers because we were good at our old job. And that doesn't necessarily mean we've already got MBA and project management training when someone moves us up in the organization, right? People have to stretch, and people have to get moved around in an organization in order to have other roles for people coming up. So hiring managers get pushed into these things, and then they assume they're good at doing it because they've interviewed before, and so surely they know how to hire, but a lot of times they don't. So they need counseling, and they need someone who is a strong enough personality to say, hey, listen, Joe or Sally, hiring manager, here's some tips, and here's what's making your peers successful, right? And, you know, here's an idea. Don't take 3 weeks to get back to me. take 2 days to get back to me about something, because I understand positions change and things get put on hold and shift, but over communicating is much better than under communicating, right? And so we'll talk about that a little later on. But the number one thing candidates need in a hiring process is constant communication. We've got some automation that's starting to be able to do that for us, some chatbots and things like that, but that does not take away from the human element. High touch is still better than high tech. So we need to counsel our hiring managers on a regular basis that here's what works, here's what doesn't, here's what's going to get you in trouble, here's what's going to make you successful, and talk to them as a peer, okay? We tend to feel like we're in this situation where hiring managers are our customers and stakeholders, and we work for them, but that's not really the situation. We most of the time don't work for hiring managers unless they're in the HR organization or in the talent organization. And those hiring managers are our peers. We have a just as important role in the company as they do, and we need to make sure that they understand that we're here to help them.
So, Craig, let me ask you this question, and this is just a question from me. The role of a hiring manager in the entire holistic hiring process, is it to be a great interviewer? Or I guess let me rephrase this. When you're guiding hiring managers or training them, are you focused on making them a great interviewer by arming them with the best questions and the best way to facilitate an interview? Or are you guiding them more to facilitate a conversation that allows them to see the inside working of that particular group? And I know that's slightly the same, but I think there's a lot of difference there as well. So
the number one thing that I'm concerned about is setting proper expectations. So I spent a couple of years as a talent acquisition leader in charge of employer brand and recruitment marketing at a big software company called CA Technologies. And we had a turnover problem. We had a candidate attraction problem as well. And that's why I was brought in there. And I was there on behalf of Allegis Global Solutions as an outsourced RPO rep, but I carried a bag, a CA bag and a CA badge, and had a CA office. And so I was essentially one of them. And we did surveys, right? And we did candidate experience and all the great things that you're supposed to do to learn about your process. And we figured out that the number one reason for early turnover in our inside sales division, for instance, was they get on and the job is not what was promised. It's not what was presented. And so, A, be honest, right? Be transparent. This is the job. Here's what you should expect. B, talk about the best parts of the job and talk those things up, but make sure that, you know, the worst parts of the job are also presented, right? But you don't have to focus on that. So like any good employer brand, pick the best things and focus on them and talk about the things that you need to work on and state that you're working on that and you know, things are getting better. But absolutely set proper expectations. And you also have to put your sales hat on when you're a manager. You are not there to just grill the candidate and pull everything out of them and not share anything about yourself, your team, or the job. You've got to put your sales hat and sell your personality a bit, have a real conversation and a fun conversation, and allow the candidate to ask you real questions and be interviewed yourself. It's a two-way conversation. It's never a one-way thing. And if it is, you're doing it wrong.
Right. I agree there. And so in that process, hiring managers are always talking salary or trying to at least get the salary information out. And in this debate, Craig, you know as well as I do, and probably everyone on the call, between agency versus corporate, there's different views there. Curious to get your view on this. I know it says stop asking about salary. Number one, why stop? Two, is it important to the process, or is it just kind of an old adage at this point and the salary is what it is, it's preset, and you're just interviewing and talking for skill set at this point?
Yeah, so it's a real fine line these days. More states and municipalities and cities are banning even the question for employers to ask about salary history, because we've got a real problem with salary disparity between men and women and other, parts of the candidate communities out there. And what we find is that hiring manager behavior is difficult to change. And there's a reason for that. Lots of companies now are voluntarily saying, all right, we're not going to ask that question anymore. And these are employers, not agencies, right? Agencies can still ask that question. We'll talk about that in a second. But employers, the client side employers, really should be very careful about this. For instance, in UK, there's legislation now requiring companies to audit their salary disparity between men and women and publish the results. We recently had to publish these results, and we were not perfect by a long shot. And so we now know very clearly, because we had to do this audit, that we've got some things to work on. But that's a little bit of public shaming, and that's going to continue to be the norm. Here in the U.S., there are massive lawsuits against some very big software and tech companies by the U.S. government because they either refuse to disclose their salary gaps, or they have disclosed them but refuse to do anything about them, like stop asking about salary history. So the reason you don't want to ask about salary history is twofold. One, you're asking a woman, what do you currently make, or what did you recently make, in order to get to what can I pay you. And hiring managers do this because they have a budget, right? And they feel like it's their job to negotiate a fair deal with a candidate, or even a cheap deal with a candidate if they can. So if they find out what the candidate is currently making, then certainly they can offer them something very similar to that. And the salary gap continues to go on and on and on. If we stop asking that question, then a person who's qualified to fit in a band, a salary band that is set up by HR for a fair wage and a fair, per that location and that job description, then we start to get away from this large gender disparity in pay. The other side of that is, think about the number of workers who have been at executive levels and are coming back into the workforce and really just want to do an interesting job and interesting work. They don't want to be a CEO or a CFO anymore. They want to just do the interesting work. So they go interview for that job, and they're told that they are way out of the range or way too overqualified because of their salary history. And so now we don't ask that question of, people coming back to the workforce, or trying to sort of drop down in what they've been doing in order to just do interesting work. And they're willing to accept a much lower position or a much lower salary. So the salary gap is it affects lots of different parts of the candidate population, not just the gap between men and women. And so hiring managers who feel like this is their job to execute on their budget and get these very tight wages need to understand that that's not the way we're going to do business anymore. You can ask the question. You can say, what are your salary expectations? And if we do that, then candidates can tell us whatever they want. And there's another thing that I see a lot when I do workshops for job seekers. And by the way, Ryan, I still do those LinkedIn training workshops on a regular basis that you asked about for both sales teams and recruiting teams and job seekers. But what I hear a lot is that it's hard to fill out a job application because of the question there is about salary history is still on there, and you can't get past that question if you don't answer it. And so the answer to that question, if you talk to a job seeker, is just put 0. And that's how you avoid that.
So we have a couple questions that have come in, and I think we can get them in right here. Do you run into the problem where hiring managers don't have the time? How do you manage that response? So maybe that was for the last question, but we can jump in right here real quick before we go forward.
Yeah, you absolutely do run into that. They don't want to talk to recruiters all day long. They don't even have time really to interview the candidates that they need to. And they're just like anyone else in the organization. We all get stuck on conference calls, one after the other, and then are expected to somehow do our work whenever that's all done, like at the end of the day or in the middle of the night or whatever it is. So yeah, everyone's busy. My suggestion is just put time on their calendar. Don't ask. Don't even go back and forth with what works best for you. Just put time on their calendar and then give them the opportunity to suggest a better time if they need to. And that's a tried and true method. Again, you're a peer, right? You don't work for them. You are a peer, and you're an expert at your job, and you need to counsel them on, what's going to make them successful.
And we've got one more. Would love to know your experience in transforming company culture during rapid growth. How do you get everyone aboard and in sync?
Yeah, so one of the best ways to do that is literally as simple as hashtags. So, fun little story from CA Technologies. We had some interesting benefits. We had pet benefits at CA Technologies, where if you get a new pet, you can request a day off for socialization with that pet. If you lose a pet, you can request a day off for bereavement. And we would send a little HR bundle gift bag of branded swag for your pet, a bandana, dog bowl, etc. And put a card in it that says, hey, thanks for your service here and congratulations on your new friend. If you're going to share photos online, make sure to tag hashtag life at CA so we can share in the joy with you. And then people did it all over the organization. So rapid growth or not, you start getting that sort of magnetic culture coming around sort of an initiative like, show us your pet, things like that with a hashtag. And so it was so successful, we started doing it for new babies, when you move to a new home, summer vacation, swag bags with a card that says, hey, we want to be part of your life, and you're a great part of our culture. So tag us if you're sharing photos if you want to. And that's a great way to bring everyone together.
I remember seeing that campaign. And thinking, I had some thoughts on it at the time, and I just remember like, wow, really? That's pretty cool and kind of odd. But I liked it. And now today, it's I don't know if they're still doing it. I was like 4 or 5 years ago you were there, but I remember seeing it, and I know, and I see companies today doing similar things, and I just think that's such a great idea. We had another question that came in, maybe on the last question, but we can go back to that here. What percentage of companies do you believe have organized company-wide hiring processes in place, or do you think most hiring teams are just guessing?
Yeah, I think most companies say they do, and they write playbooks around what the hiring process is supposed to be, and what the recruiting process is supposed to be, and where the recruiter fits in, where the recruitment marketing fits in, but they don't execute on it very well. So they hand out the playbooks, and then managers with their little fiefdoms still do the same things that they've always done. Again, that hiring manager behavior is very difficult to change. So you have to share statistics with your hiring managers about who's doing it well and how they're doing it, because managers love data, right? If they can understand that they're not being successful, or they're wasting the company's time and money because they're dragging the process out, then they're more likely to actually change. So, all right, Mr. Hiring Manager, yeah, you're really good at negotiating down your candidates' salaries, but it takes you so long that you're burning tons of money and everyone's time doing it. The longer your time to fill, the more money you spend, and the less likely you're going to have a good sticky candidate as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more there. All right, so job descriptions. Talk about them. Know the job description. What do you mean by this?
Right. So one of the number one complaints I hear from job candidates is they came in to interview for something and the manager interviewed for something completely different. Talked about all kinds of stuff that didn't have anything to do with what was in the job description. And so if you're a hiring manager, if you've got no handle on what the job description says, you're not going to be successful. So you need to talk to the job description. And if the job description needs to change, you need to go through legal or whoever it needs to be to make that happen. Because if you're talking to job candidates about something that is not related to what they read or what they were sold by the recruiter and by your website, you're doing the wrong thing. You're doing a bad job. It's as simple as that. There are tools now that you can use to try to target your job description to various parts of the candidate population. So for instance, if you want to write a job description that talks more to women or more to millennials, you can use Textio to help try to inform what kind of verbiage you should use to do that. But that doesn't change the facts about what the job is about. And so you need to make sure that what you're interviewing for is what's advertised, and then is also what the job actually is once they get on board.
Yeah, it's funny, and I'm not sure if you're following along online. This has nothing to do with the webinar, but Stacy Zapar is now presenting somewhere. I don't know where, at the Oregon Zoo, it looks like, going beyond intake meetings, and it's similar to the job description. And I just put it up there for you to see. But there's she has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 talking points that are very similar to what you're talking about right here, exactly at this very moment. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's it's an important topic. It really is. So let me ask you this. So outside of what we're portraying to candidates or sharing with the candidates in terms of a job description during the interview process, where do you see gaps from in between the recruiter and the hiring manager truly understanding the job description, the wants versus the needs? And I'm just going to kind of read this right off of her slide that she has up here. The pie in the sky candidates. Do you want clones of the team? Is it about skill set, or is it more of a culture fit? Where do you guide hiring managers and recruiters together on that balance?
So you have to talk to hiring managers very plainly about the process. If you want them to help you be successful, you have to understand that their agenda is not necessarily your agenda. You want to make sure that they're on the same page with you on a regular basis about getting back to you, because the one thing you don't want is to submit 5 great candidates that, per your conversation, look on paper just like the manager wants, and then the manager turns around and hires someone that he went to school with, right? That's exactly what happens a lot of the time. And so you have to have that exact conversation. Listen, Mr. Hiring Manager, or Mr. Buyer if you're in sales, here's what we want to avoid. I'm going to show you all these great houses, right? Let's call me a real estate agent instead of a recruiter. I'm going to do all the research and show you all these great houses. And if you're just going to end up buying from your friend, I need to know that up front. We need to have a frank conversation about this, because that's not going to work for me long term, and it's going to ruin our relationship. So are we on the same page? Are you going to buy from me? If you are going to buy from me, I need to know exactly what you actually want and what's actually going to work. And tell me your feelings about it. It doesn't have to be just facts. Tell me your feelings. Are you a gut feel kind of person? And if so, what's your gut feel say about the type of candidate you really want in this job? And then I'll tell you whether it's legal to choose like that or not. And we can avoid conflicts with, being out of regulatory compliance, and ensure your relationship with the recruiting team stays solid.
Right. Hey, Craig, what was the website you mentioned? Was it Textio?
Textio, that's
JD?
right.
Yeah. Okay. So Chantel, it's Textio. I just dropped it in there.
I think it's text.io.
Yes. So, all right, questions coming in. How much does agile recruiting help in eliminating gaps in the job description and hiring the right candidate for the right requirement?
So that's totally going to depend on the culture of your organization. Companies decide sometimes just randomly that they're going to all of a sudden be agile. And that is sometimes code for no more remote workers. Everyone has to come into the office. But if you actually follow the agile methodology in the hiring process and working with your managers, that means you do actually have to collaborate and project manage the process. So short of just taking over as a project manager yourself, it helps if you have things like recruitment coordinators to do this, but there's also software that can help manage that process along the way and keep checks and balances on timelines. And I'll tell you that if you can afford it, hiring a company like Olivia or Nborder or MyAlly to manage the process by saying, here are the steps, here are the timelines, and here's how you should respond. And those messages go to hiring managers, to recruiters, and to candidates to keep everyone in compliance. That's the best agile kind of process you can have, collaborating with a chatbot over a process you've all agreed on in the first place.
That makes sense. So over communication with recruiters and candidates. Curious to get your take on this. As recruiters, we've always felt we are the end-all be, maybe not the end-all be, but we have the best communication process. We understand the process. We understand how to work with and coax potential candidates into the company. We understand how to work with the hiring managers. Define what you mean by over-communicate. And once we get into that conversation, where I want to go with this is, what are the elements inside of that communication process that creates a smooth process that allows for a good hiring experience?
Right. So if you set yourself up for success in the first place by telling your manager, listen, don't stonewall me. That's the worst thing that can happen in this process. We can make this quick, easy, and seamless if we communicate. And over communication is 10 times better than under communication. So for instance, tell me what your schedule is going to be for the week. Tell me when you're going to be going out of town. Tell me when you've got so much stacked on your plate that you are, too busy to deal with things right now. Let me know these things, and then I can communicate properly with the candidate to, let them know what's happening. Candidates are fine to wait as long as they understand what's going on. And so literally over communication is an expectation that you should set with the hiring manager, definitely to you, so that you can adequately communicate with the candidate. And I can tell you that there's not ever too much communication with the candidate. If you're even just texting them or emailing them, letting them know what's happening, and saying, here's the timeline we're shooting for. This isn't concrete because there's some moving pieces here, and, be as transparent as you can be without divulging anything that's proprietary or, against the manager's wishes.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the pieces of communication there are absolutely the welcome message, the introduction message with if you ask me, a link to the hiring manager's LinkedIn profile. There are situations where when a candidate has already applied to a job, then, you cannot or should not consider anything you see online as part of your decision whether to hire them, but that doesn't mean you can't get to know each other, right? So if you were to go have lunch with each other and talk about anything that's on your LinkedIn profile after a job candidate has applied to a job, well, all that's part of the interview process. It's the same thing with online information. So share the manager's LinkedIn profile or an internal company profile that's maybe on your website so that you set some expectation about who that person is. The candidate can do their research And I'm fine with spoon feeding that to the candidate. And if they don't do the research at that point, then they're absolutely not the right person. But don't expect them to necessarily be all sleuthy, even though we know they will be. Get it out there in the open and say, we expect you to be sleuthy here. And we're going to show you, what you need to know. The next phase is I would do a cross introduction to introduce the hiring manager rather than just setting up a phone interview and saying, this is the person you're going to talk to, and there's been no warm intro on email before that. I would absolutely do that. So when you're setting up the interview, you set up a way for them to communicate directly if the manager wants to, or you can say, you'll still deal directly with me, but I'm giving you this manager's email address. Now, some managers don't want that. However, if you can possibly get it, I absolutely do it. And just set the expectation that you should still email me and don't email a manager directly unless the manager requests that. And good managers will. But you need to be in some control of that process. So you want to be CC'd on everything, every piece of communication, if possible. The next step then, obviously, is setting up the interview and prepping the candidate. But between all those steps, there's going to be times where the timeline shifts. It absolutely does. The manager's interest in the candidate may shift. And you've got to be frank and, again, overly communicative to explain what's happening and why. And, maybe the manager says, we really need someone that can write better. And so you might need to be asking for some writing samples. But if the manager's not telling you that, you can't explain that to the candidate. So, these are the types of things where I say over communication is always best.
Okay, and we've got some questions coming in, Craig. So I know we're coming up on our hour here, so I want to get some of these in. If you're still on the call and you have questions, feel free to drop them into the question panel there. We are going to start pushing out some of these questions to Craig now and get those answered for you. Yes, to everyone asking about the recording and the deck, we will have everything to you all right after the webinar or shortly after the webinar. So Craig, let's start with the first question. What tech do you recommend companies look at if they are looking to revamp their tech stack? I know that's a loaded question because there's a lot of questions you have to have answered to make that recommendation. But I guess maybe another way to phrase that, if you don't have an answer there, would be, what are you seeing in the marketplace as trends, and where are companies looking to revamp their stack?
Yeah, so it's funny. In the last year, a lot of companies have moved beyond just tech stack and are getting really tightly focused on pieces of the tech stack and saying now things like, what should my AI stack be, right? We've gotten that sort of far advanced. And so there are pieces of each element that you want to consider. But for the most part, you still have to have a fairly robust ATS, applicant tracking system. This is beyond your HR, your standard HR software, right? So an applicant tracking system. We all know that applicant tracking systems aren't necessarily the easiest thing to search and or market from. So then you also need a CRM layered, candidate relationship management system, layered on top of that ATS, so that you can take that data and build lists that you can market to your candidates from. Now, we're coming up on GDPR compliance, so we're going to have to ask everyone currently in our CRMs and probably our ATSs to re-engage with us and opt in to be communicated to. But the fact remains that once we get beyond this, we're still going to have to be able to market those people that opt in. So to run drip campaigns, to run sourcing campaigns, you absolutely need a CRM. You're going to need some sort of interview scheduling software if you don't have a team of coordinators. You can do that with tools like MyAlly, or you can do it with an interview interface like HireVue. So there's a couple of tools there that you might be interested in. And then depending on your company's culture and the way you go about hiring, you might need an assessment tool somewhere in there as well. Some of these tools do all that stuff or handle it all for you. Outside of that, then you're going to need some additional AI, if you are in that space, to coordinate interviews, to answer initial interview questions, to help you along in the hiring and onboarding process. And this is the typical stack that we're seeing right now. There are lots of other things you can add on, like a sourcing software in the middle, like Hiring Solved, where you take a look at your existing internal database and refresh it with external information from the world of the web, and say match that against open job recs and stack rank our existing candidates to tell me who is most likely to interview, who fits best against the job description that we've got in our existing database. And that's one of the things we're seeing a lot of. How do we actually utilize the data that we've got, refresh it, and make it so that we're not doing a brand new sourcing effort every time we get out of the gate?
Which is kind of the question from 2007, and right. And even not. It's just now we're moving into more of a tech-based environment that allows us to actually accomplish that. All right, some other questions here. What are your thoughts on eliminating the time taking to fill a position from the initial job requirement to sourcing? It looks like to 2 or 3 rounds of interviews to a final hiring and onboarding when these managers are on a crunch time. So let me kind of pare that down. It sounds like we're looking to, what are your thoughts on the process or steps someone can take to eliminate the time it takes to get from the job rec requirement through 3 rounds of interviewing? How do we pare that down to one and then maybe a follow-up interview for the hiring manager?
Right. So this is where your manager relationship really comes into play. If you've done a good job up front setting the expectations, you're going to be able to eliminate a lot of that excess and gap. But also, there are some really great tools out there that can speed up the sourcing process by a lot, right? And also the interview scheduling process can be automated and fixed by a lot. Going back and forth on emails and phone calls to try to set up interviews is inefficient. And so if you can get scheduling software, that's really, really helpful. And it also keeps hiring managers in line. Now, if they keep pushing it off, you can actually set rules to where they don't get to interview people if they push it off more than 2 or 3 times. So you can kind of keep them in their place and in check by doing that. The other fun thing is you can set guidelines and leaderboards on some of this software to say, here's how hiring manager A is doing, and here's the time to fill for hiring manager B, and literally do some public shaming inside the organization. So I kind of feel like building a time to fill leaderboard is one of my current most effective and fun ways to demonstrate, what an efficient process looks like.
Right. All right. So back to salary. Did you mention earlier, Craig, that agencies are still allowed to ask about the salary in San Francisco? And is that, I'm not sure if that was Canada or California you were trying to say, but is that still allowed, or did you mention that it's not allowed?
Well, so I'm not going to talk about the state-by-state compliance or the region-by-region compliance. I just can say that in many areas, agencies are still allowed to ask about salary history. I'd say it is not a best practice, and that if that's how you're negotiating to improve your margin, then I think you're doing it wrong. That's just my personal thought. But I come from an agency background, and I say that you should be able to bill on value and not just on competitive price per candidate. So the other thing about that is you cannot share that salary history information with the hiring manager in most places now, or in many places now. So you have to check what your laws are, what the client company's internal policy is, and make sure you're complying by that. You can know the information, and you can usually gather the information just by asking the candidate, what are your expectations for salary? It's just because that one exact question has changed that people think, oh, I'm never going to know salary history anymore. That's generally not true. Most candidates will tell you where they've been but you can't ask that specific question in a lot of areas now.
Right. So one more thing on salary, and we got about 5 minutes left, Craig. So we'll we get 3 or 4 more questions. So we'll kind of scurry on through these. Is asking about salary expectations the same as asking their current salary? I think what their point is there is, if you're asking what your expectations are, isn't that kind of cornering them into saying, here's what my salary is?
No, it is perfectly legal to ask, what are your salary expectations?
So from a maybe not legality, I think this is more coming from the perspective of the candidate. If you're asking me what my expectations are and I'm saying it's $25,000 a year, what's the difference if you're asking me what my current salary is and I tell you it's $25,000 a year, but my expectation, or I guess what the question maybe is getting to, is the candidate cornering themselves into a set expectation on that salary? I mean, it's kind of,
well,
right?
this is where your negotiating skills come into play. And so for you job seekers out there and you recruiters alike, you should expect that the job seeker to ask you, well, what does the job pay, before they ever give you a number? Okay. This is the game of who blinks first. And recruiters, I'm just going to tell you now, you need to be prepared to give the appropriate range for what the band of that salary is paying, or even that hourly rate. There is a range. We don't lowball people anymore in this society today. And so that's the expectation. So a candidate can, if they have not done their research, throw out a number, or they can wisely say, well, can you tell me what the position pays? And if you're going to give them a range that's so broad that the lowest end is really below the band, well, you as the recruiter or hiring manager are doing it wrong.
Right. All right, so we got time for one more question, Craig, and we're going to have to call it a day here. Do you find that recruiting agencies need a different tool set than a corporate TA team?
Yes, I think they do. I think agency recruiters do more sourcing most of the time than a corporate TA team does, right? So you better have a really good pipeline, a really good stable of people who have worked for you in the past and can give you a lot of great referrals. Referrals are still the number one way to get great candidates for both agency and internal talent teams. But I think the average internal TA recruiter does not do nearly as much sourcing as the agency person does. And I realize we have researchers and sourcers now who, build lists and things like that, but the average recruiter better have really good sourcing skills and better also have very good relationship skills because you're selling a client's organization to a candidate. And, it's important for your organization to have a good culture as well. But you better know the client's organization as well as or better than the internal team does, or you're not going to be successful long-term with that client.
Fully agreed. All right, good. So, Craig, we are up on time. I appreciate your time today and your support here with Allegis. Deepti, she had to jump off, but certainly the team at My Ally. For everyone, you will receive a recording to the webinar. You're going to get the slides, and then there'll be some goodies for you in the email. So make sure you're checking your email in the next couple of hours for some things we're going to be sending out, and we're good. So thank you everybody for showing up and giving us some support today, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks everybody. Time to play HQ.